Welcome everyone to our first episode of our author's own series on the 5 Minute Library. In this series, we discuss a book with its creator and we delve into the process of writing the book. Today, we're introducing Raga D'silva, or as she is known through her handles, Totally Out Now. She's an entrepreneur, author, and LGBTQ activist who has recently written the book Untold Lies. Hi, Raga.
Hi, Ira and Piyushi. Lovely to be on the 5 Minute Library with you both.
It's such a great honor to have you here. We've been following your work for quite a while. So let's get started.
So,
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about your book. Can you give us a brief about it and why you decided to write it in the first place?
Sure. My book, first of all, it's called Untold Lies. Okay. I wrote this book. Actually, this book has been sitting inside me for a long, long, long time. And as I think I say to a lot of my friends, that all of us have books sitting inside of us. It's like a whole library inside of us. You got 5 Minute Library. I think we've got multiple 5 minute libraries sitting inside of us. And most of these books in that library are basically untold, as we know. And all of us, I don't think there's an exception, all of us have these lies or truths, whatever, that we are very afraid to share with the world for whatever reasons, or we think it's not important to, or we are, we live in fear of what the world will say. So I had multiple such libraries, and I still have many more to go. And I remember thinking about my life, when I nearly turned 50, I was going to turn 50. And I thought to myself, there are so many stories, they're holding me back. There are things that I think I struggle with. For instance, somebody in the family called me selfish. Somebody said, you are irresponsible. Or someone said, these are terrible dysfunctional relationships you've had over the years. So people continuously gave labels, people continuously judged me. And I felt that, why did I feel like that was not right? And then I went back into my life. And that's the untold lies, basically, that experiences from our lives that shape our lives, that shape us. So we learn things that are not right about us, then we learn to unlearn. And then you reach a point in your life, you say, it's time for me to relearn. And that book is about that, really. So if you look at, there are only 9 stories. So 9 stories is a journey of a little girl who has a very, very tough childhood. It's a childhood of loneliness. She continues on her journey, says, I don't want to live this life anymore. So as an adult, she has a different life, but she makes very poor choices because her frame of reference from the past is very poor. She doesn't have any good role models, for instance. So choices are also poor. And so then that is so true for all of us, right? We make choices based on whatever experiences we have had. And then, whether she makes a choice about, she's engaged to somebody who has an affair just before 7 days of their marriage, or if she gets into a relationship with somebody who's very violent just because they are jealous and insecure, or it's about, losing your place in life because you think, through a journey where your mother has passed, and you're still searching for her. So there are very point moments in our life that we discover things about ourselves, and also we learn so much more.
That's a very interesting perspective. So, can you tell us a little more about the writing process? Was it cathartic and relieving to get all of this out on paper? Or was it difficult and you just did it because you had to help someone out there dealing with the same situation?
Very interesting question. I think it was difficult as well as cathartic. You can say that as well. When I was writing this book, I was traveling a lot between Mumbai and London. So that is at least 8.5 hours of flight, or 9 hours at times. And so each time I would write one story or one page, it would take me weeks to get over it. I would go into a dark place because it meant that I had to go back into a certain experience in my life that was not very, it was painful and traumatic. So to relive that trauma is something that, if you have been through something like that, that's the only way you can understand. Now, and I hope nobody has to go through that kind of trauma. But once I put it on paper, then the whole experience was cathartic and I felt liberated. Now I don't attach myself to that pain anymore. Yeah, so the process was that I would write it, I would then let it go. It was like going to a psychologist who says, if you don't like some experience, put it on paper and burn it. I don't know whether you've heard of that.
Yes.
So that's what I was doing. That's why when you told me about some other aspects, I haven't read that book again. Once I've written, I have never touched it again. People ask me to do a reading. Very rarely I would do it. Very rarely, because it's like it's over. That part of my life is over. So yes, so there's a process. I decided I was going to write something different, and that's how I've lived my life. I always try to be to put things in a way that works for me more than somebody else. And I think it's a selfish way of looking at it, but I think it's also change making. I believe that we should not wait for other people to tell us what to do. We should do what we want to do so that others can learn from it as well. So my story, so the way I wrote Untold Lies was short stories and poems that then go into the next story. Then there's poetry that goes into the next story. So they're all interconnected. They're not standalone. So if you understand that process, it's a beautiful journey. For me, it is my journey where I think in stories, I think in chapters, then I think in poetry. Nobody can tell me that I'm a prose writer or a poetry writer. I'm just a writer. So words flow like that for me. So today, as I speak with you, maybe some words will come to me in the form of poetry. So that's how I translate my life anyway. That's how I live my life. I have a song for every moment. It's seriously, I think in songs. So if I have to meet somebody, instantly a song, a Hindi song or a song that I have heard as a child would come into my head. That's how I live. So
What
my story
Bollywood
is
song
about
came
that.
to your mind when you met Nicola? I'm curious now.
छू कर मेरे मन को. Yes, I have a song for every moment. No, really. And I can say तुमसे मिलके to you both.
But
Okay.
thank you for sharing with us how personal this experience was for you. And now that I understand that there is a deep personal connection to every story and poem that you've written, and you've actually revisited it in the process of writing it. So, when taking this into light, why did you choose a third person narrative writing style? Why narrate as the little girl?
Yeah, a very, very, again, a very interesting question. I think I wanted to detach myself from the experience. And the only way I could detach myself from the experience by pretending, as I've done all my life, that that person is actually not me, it is somebody else. It's so much easier to live your life experiences in third person.
Mm.
And maybe I'm still not in touch with the truth of what happened or what experiences I've had. It helps me think it's some other person, like we talked about the book cover, this little girl, it's happening to her. As long as it is happening to her, I'm not traumatized by it. When it happens to me, then the experience and the reaction to that experience is quite painful.
No, we can definitely understand. And you're right. When you look at it from a third person perspective, it allows you to see it as a whole and not just the at that moment what was going on. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
I wanted to ask you about the significance of 3 a.m. because while reading the book, I saw that it's mentioned in a lot of different poems. So, do you feel that 3 a.m. is when you are at your creative peak? Is this where you find, your best periods of creativity, peace, art?
I read somewhere, maybe it is stuck in my head as a young person when I was a younger person, that at 3 a.m. you are at your best, not only in terms of creativity, in terms of the stillness in your being. So if you wake up at 2 or 1 o'clock, you'll see there's still a lot of noise outside. But at 3 a.m., suddenly it almost feels that the world is quiet. And that kind of helps people like me automatically. Naturally, I wake up at 3, and naturally I have words that come to me, because I think the stillness of the night helps people, and it helps me. I have so many times in the entire 51 years that I have lived, I've woken up at 3 a.m. and I have written so many stories and poems around that time, and they just flow. And I know a lot of people say about 3 a.m. friends as well. If you may have remembered that she's my 3 a.m. friend or my 2 a.m. That's because of this. At 3 a.m., I think people are at the most, aware of themselves. We are still, and I think we are the most honest within ourselves at that time. No outside influence.
Trust me, I've tried explaining this to my mom. This is why I stay up till 3, 4 a.m. She's like, कुछ भी बोलती रहते हो बस सुबह लेट उठते हैं."
Tell mom you are the most creative. Your creativity is enhanced at 3 a.m.
But I definitely agree with you. And like you've mentioned, the format of the storium. There's a story that describes a particular incident in your life, and then there are poems that help us understand what went on in your mind during that incident and after. So tell me, through this format, you've spoken about the little girl and then eventually the young woman. So what was it like? How did that transition happen from little girl to young woman?
I wish that life was this easy that we can look in hindsight and say, how did you transition? You don't really, like, every day you wake up in the morning, you live your life the best way you can. And people say the best version of you. I don't think everybody lives the best version of themselves unless they are, they reflect and they decide to. And then life goes on. Suddenly you find yourself, you're six, and then you're suddenly 16, then you're 26, you're 36, 56, and life finishes. So you're not transitioning by choice, but every day you're evolving, you're learning. At least for me, I remember right from the time that I was 6 years old, when my soul theory, by the way, came to me at a very young age. I have just lived every day magically, really honestly. I don't know how else to put this. I'm very aware of each day. I'm not one of those people who lives my day and say, "Aaj khatam ho gaya, I wonder what I did today." Every day I'm so aware of this minute with you now. This is my most precious minute. Now, next minute, if I'm going to do the laundry, I will be fully aware of that. So I live very much in the moment. But I also am a contradiction, because I talk in that book about living in a fantasy world, if you remember. Because to run away from doing the laundry, I might go into a Bollywood film set, for instance. So the transitioning is not deliberate. The transition just happens from a child to a adult to a woman. The choices we make are the cues in our life on what our transitioning has been.
It's actually a really nice way to look at it.
Yeah, and I love that there's this mindfulness theme throughout the book, in the moment, talking about that. I also wanted to ask you about your cover page. So, your cover page illustration shows a little girl trying to reach a log, and you briefly covered it in one of the stories about your father. Could you tell us about how and why you picked this particular moment as the illustration cover for your book?
When I think about my childhood, and it's a long time ago, as you know, what comes to my mind, my first thought is always about this little house we lived in, which was really as big probably as a bathroom now we have. It's very, very tiny house, which has had a cupboard, which had little kitchen utensils, even a little bath area in a little 10 by 10. So I don't know, and with a cot, a bed under the bed, you had everything stored. I remember that. I also remember being locked inside the house by my very kind mother who went to work, and locked in with my very drunk father. Those days, that's all he did. And that's when you think about a film in your head about how your life would be, that was the first thought that comes to mind. So I felt that that kind of shaped my life. How I felt, I still feel that moment, that feeling of being helpless, that feeling of being very lonely, and that feeling of wanting to do something more, even at 6. So that is why my illustration that I chose on my cover was this. That's a girl who feels trapped inside, but she's not going to be trapped all her life. She has a little dabba, like, that stool she's standing on, and even though she can't reach the latch, she's going to find a way to open that door and go out. So it is not negative, it is a positive for me, that I'm going to find my way out, and I found my way out.
Wow.
And
Okay.
all the little girls will find their way out.
That's such a beautiful thought to put out there. I really hope this reaches every little girl who feels trapped. Um, I also, so like you said, you felt trapped, and you also mentioned a lot of labels and boxes that were put on you that probably made you feel a lot more trapped. So, you know, um, do you feel like this concept of putting people in labels and boxes, do you think this comes from the patriarchal society that little girls are brought up in?
It's just not the girls, huh, by the way. Labels are put for anybody. Any human
Right.
soul is given a label. Right from that moment you are born, you say ladki hui hai, ladka hua hai. That's also a label only. You've given in these days of gender fluidity, for instance, that's the first label we get. Then you have Mr., Ms., Mrs. That starts. Then in my book, if you read my story, where I was labeled selfish
Yeah.
just because I was hungry, and I ended up having that slice of bread which nobody else wanted or did not want to have, because they were looking after me. So labels are given to us, whether it is titles or this designations. Look at us in India or anywhere in the world. All our business cards have labels, and we will sometimes introduce people like that, right? this is Piyushi, she's the head of this at this bank. And then they will say, oh, but who is Piyushi? I don't want to know what she does, but who is Piyushi? Or who is Ira, right? So these conversations start far, far, far before we are even born. So labels seem to be a way of boxing us. And I agree with you that it is very patriarchal, but it is a way of holding us back, where society believes that if they put these conditions on us, and we have to live within those conditions. And you know what? It's not getting any better, it's getting worse. If there's one thing you can do in life, is let go of the labels.
So you've let go of a lot of labels, and right now you're at that stage where you've unlocked that door and you've smashed all these labels and boxes. And in a lot of your poems, like in The Little Girl, It's All Temporary, and Heal, you've taken on this advisory sort of tone, where you're telling people or you're helping people overcome a difficult time. So I wanted to understand that as a last thing, is that was there someone in your life who did that for you, or do you wish that there was someone who did that for you, so you're doing it for everyone else through your stories?
See, first of all, although I come across as I give advice, I actually, one thing I refrain from is giving advice. I tell my story, and in that story, whatever interpretation you want to have of that story. So, see, like both of you said different things, what you gained from my book, right? When you read the book. So, whatever you want to gain from it, you gain. So, I write for me. Like I said, I'm a very selfish writer. I write for me. I don't write for you at all. If it has impacted you and it has brought you some smiles or tears, that's great. But I don't write for you. And so when I write about temporary or healing or women issues or shackles that I wrote in the, it's all about me. That's how I feel. Now, from when I share, but what I'm doing is I'm sharing a part of my soul with you all. And in that journey, if there's something you can take away from it, which helps you, then that is a bonus for me.
That, definitely I feel Piyushi and I, once we read this book, we did have our individual takeaways, and we would be happy to discuss them and more with a focus on the relationship aspect of this book in part 2 of this episode, again with Raga. So for now, we're coming to a conclusion, and we will
See you in 5.
thank you, Raga.
See you in 5.